Aloha! This is 22.3, the Italian unification. If you've ever thought about it, it seems like it would naturally be unified because it's one long peninsula, but the truth is it's made up of a whole bunch of very unique and independent city-states that when the Roman Empire kind of collapsed, these city-states were fairly independent, and throughout its long history, all the way through the Middle Ages and up into early modern times, those different city-states would, go to war against one another, and sometimes they would conquer each other, but there was never a precedent of unity among them or unity of the peninsula. That ended with the Roman Empire. So it's not until the early 1800s when Napoleon actually breezes through Europe and kind of introduces the idea that there should be unity. The idea was planted by Napoleon. Manzini is living in the 1830s, so he's maybe 20 years after Napoleon, and he pledges his life to the pursuit of the unification of Italy. And it is going to take his lifetime because it is unified in 1870s when the Papal States are forced to give up their territory right in the middle of the Italian peninsula. So Manzini, in order to achieve his goals, he began a secret society to try to force the powers that were basically colonizing the Italian peninsula. In the south, France had a lot of that territory that they were ruling over Naples, which is the lower part of the Italian peninsula, and the island of Sicily. In the middle, the Papal States were there. That means the church governed a large middle section of the Italian peninsula. And in the north, you had one independent kingdom, which was the Kingdom of Sardinia. The Kingdom of Sardinia actually had its own king, Victor Emmanuel II. The rest of the northern part of Italy was owned by Austria. Victor Emmanuel II had a genius prime minister whose name was Cavillo Cavour, Count Cavillo Cavour. And I like to compare Cavillo Cavour to Otto von Bismarck because they had similar goals and they had similar ways of getting their goals accomplished as well. Count Camillo Cavour basically also made it his life goal to unify the Italian peninsula, but under the leadership of Victor Emmanuel and the Kingdom of Sardinia. He knew that he was not going to be able to beat either Austria or France in a direct war, but he figured out that if he used one against the other, then he would have much more likelihood of success. So he creatively made an agreement with France. He approaches France first. You need some backstory to understand this. In about 1865, Russia is longing for a warm water port. All the ports that they own are along the frozen tundra, and they have one small port at St. Petersburg, but that gets frozen over sometimes. So they're looking for trade and expansion, and the Ottoman Empire is in the south, and they feel like they can attack the Ottoman Empire and gain some sea ports in the Black Sea and also through the Bosporus and the Dardanelles, Constantinople. So this was Russia's idea. So they start trundling down with their huge military, and Britain and France look at each other and they think, if Russia gets this port, they're going to become unmanageable. They are already pretty strong, and if they get this port and if they beat the Ottoman Empire, then that's going to be terrible. They, along with the Ottomans, go to war against Russia, and this is called the Crimean War because it was fought on a little tiny peninsula in the Black Sea, which is still, it's on the southern European area. Cavour agreed to join France as an ally in this battle with the concession that France would make an alliance with Sardinia, that if Sardinia ever went to war, France would be on Sardinia's side, that France would come and back Sardinia up. Boy, that was really clever. So Cavour helps the French and the English in the battle, and then later, a couple of years later, he maneuvers so that Austria eventually declares war on Sardinia. Austria thinks that it's going to be an easy pickings, quick battle, and then Sardinia will be knocked out. Then Austria will basically own all of northern Italy. But the moment they start to move, France moves in and totally takes Austria out. Sardinia and Count Cavour move in very quickly and capture all of that northern territory that was part of Italy and say, thank you, France. And France is like, wait, what just happened here? And so Cavour was really smart about that. And France doesn't move right away, but Cavour has a plan. The problem is that southern Italy is owned by France, and so Cavour contacts a freedom fighter, Giuseppe Garibaldi. Giuseppe Garibaldi, I just love that name. It just kind of, you have to say it a couple times. So Giuseppe Garibaldi, when he was young, met Giuseppe Manzini, and he had been inspired by Manzini to become to fight for the unification of Italy himself. Except where Manzini liked backroom dealings and secret societies, Giuseppe Garibaldi was a fighter and a warrior and a leader of men. I think he must have been extremely charismatic, or he was just very, very compelling. I kind of imagine him as an INFJ guy who is just so, people are just drawn to him because his motives are very honest. He truly longs for the unity of Italy. There is no self-aggrandizement in the scenario, and he is a compelling figure because he is so genuine and so self-effacing. Cavour approaches Garibaldi and says, "Hey, I will support you. I'll give you weapons and transportation. I have a bunch of ships that I can help transport your men. We'll support you anyway. I want to be your ally in your efforts to unify the Italian peninsula, especially in your efforts to fight against France." Giuseppe takes that as an invitation to get going. He takes his 1,000 men. It's a quick and easy victory. They were very surprised at how crumbly France actually was. So this is happening after 1860s. They manage to quickly conquer Sicily, and then they move over to the mainland and they get to Naples, and they basically just mop up, and the French leave, and there's very little to fight about. It is a shock to all. And so he is quickly moving towards the regional capital, to Naples. And Cavour realizes that he has let loose a major problem because the people really love Garibaldi, and they're kind of meh about the king of Sardinia, of Victor Emmanuel II. They're like, who? Victor who? So Cavour realizes he has to move quickly. So he sends some troops, some Sardinian troops down to just make sure that Garibaldi turns over all the territory to the Sardinians. And when the troops approach, there's this moment where everybody's holding their breath, because is Garibaldi going to actually let go of the power that he has? And he does. It is an extraordinary moment because he could totally have claimed the crown, the throne for himself, and everybody would have been happy to follow him. So it's really a unique moment. All right, so he graciously gives the territory to King Victor Emmanuel II, and then he retires to his little villa on Sardinia. The only problem is there is still this big swath of territory right in the middle of the Italian peninsula, and it's owned by the Catholic Church. Garibaldi doesn't want to attack that because he's a good Catholic boy, and he is not going to do that. He's not going to take territory away from the church. The church is not at all interested in giving up the territory either. The opportunity doesn't happen until the Franco-Prussian War. France is defeated by the Germans. The Catholic Church had picked the wrong side, and so part of the deal was that the Catholic Church ends up having to give up all of its extra territory, except they retained ownership of a very, very small enclave within Rome itself, and this becomes known as the Vatican. So if you go to the Vatican today, it is its own country. It's a postage stamp sized country that is the size of basically a city block. You can actually buy postage and send a letter, and it will go through the Vatican mail. It's different than the rest of Italy. Italy is finally united in 1870s. But what kind of a new country are we going to have? So Sardinia was a monarchy, but that wasn't really the idea of nationalism. Nationalism is the idea that the people have the sovereignty. So it's a democracy. The problem is they weren't allowing democracy. Very few people could actually vote. So it took a couple more years for voting rights to be extended for most of the men that lived in Italy. They had kind of the pseudo-democracy going on, where they had a bicameral legislature like the United States, except the upper house was for the nobility. There was no election of the upper house. And the lower house did have elections, but very few people could actually vote. It was basically people who had money. And sadly, there were a few very wealthy, but most of the people were not wealthy. So very few people could vote. The upper house had complete veto power over anything that the lower house wanted to pass. So it took a couple more years of fighting, all the way up until the 1900s, before you start to see things open up and more freedoms and opportunities.